I'm Mitchell. I'm 27 now, and I've been waiting for this exact moment for 6 years. Some of you might think that's dramatic. 6 years is a long time to hold on to something. But when your own family treats you like you're nothing, when they make it crystal clear that you exist only to serve their golden child, you either accept it and become a doormat forever, or you plan. I chose to plan. Let me back up. My brother Carlos is 3 years older than me. Growing up, I thought it was normal that he got the bigger room, the newer clothes, the car when he turned 16 while I rode my bike to my part-time job because there was never money for a second vehicle. I thought it was normal that my parents attended every single one of his baseball games but missed my high school graduation because Carlos had a work dinner they wanted to support him at. I genuinely believed this was just how families worked until I went to college and saw how other families actually functioned. My sister Ariana is the youngest, and she learned early that siding with Carlos meant siding with our parents. She's not evil, honestly. She's just a coward who takes the path of least resistance, and that path has always been worshiping at the altar of Carlos. The reason my parents worship Carlos is simple and pathetic. He looks exactly like my dad Gerald did at that age. Same build, same face, same mannerisms. My mom Barbara literally calls him Gerald Jr. sometimes, even though that's not his name. Meanwhile, I took after my mom's side of the family, which apparently made me some kind of genetic disappointment. I found out at 19 that my dad actually wanted a paternity test when I was born, because he couldn't believe I was his. My mom told me this like it was a funny story at Thanksgiving. Like, haha, isn't it hilarious that your father didn't think you were his child because you don't look like his clone? But the thing that really set everything in motion happened when I was 21. I had been working since I was 16, saved everything I could. Scholarships covered most of my tuition, and I worked 2 jobs during summers to cover the rest. By 21, I had saved up about $12,000. Not a fortune, but for a kid paying his own way through everything, it felt like proof that I was doing something right. Carlos, meanwhile, had gotten everything handed to him. College paid for, car paid for, apartment deposit paid for, and at 24, he decided to start a business. Some app development thing that he swore was going to make him rich. My parents didn't have the money to invest because they'd already spent everything on his lifestyle over the years. So my dad sat me down and told me I was going to give Carlos my savings. Not asked, told me. He said Carlos needed it more than I did, that I could always save more money later, that family helps family. I said no. I said I had worked for 6 years for that money and I wasn't giving it away. My dad called me selfish. My mom cried and asked why I hated my brother. Carlos sat there looking smug because he knew they'd pressure me into it eventually. I didn't give in. I refused. And for that, they kicked me out of the house 3 weeks before my senior year of college started. Just like that. 21 years of being the dutiful second son who never complained. And they threw me out because I wouldn't hand over my savings to fund Carlos's fantasy startup. I slept in my car for 2 weeks. I showered at the campus gym. I ate ramen and peanut butter sandwiches. And I decided right then that I would never forget what they did to me, and I would make sure they regretted it. Carlos's app failed within 8 months. He never even launched it, just burned through investor money and quit when things got hard. Classic Carlos. Okay, so we got a dad out here who looked at his newborn baby and said, "Nah, run the DNA, this ain't mine," because the kid had his wife's genetics. Sir, that is literally how reproduction works. You married this woman. You saw her face. You presumably liked her face. And then your son has features from her side and suddenly it's Maury Povich time? And Barbara, told this story at Thanksgiving like it's a quirky family anecdote. Oh, remember when your father accused me of cheating because you have my nose? Pass the cranberry sauce. These people have been fumbling the parenting bag since the delivery room. And listen, I need everyone to understand what $12,000 represents when you're a broke college kid working 2 jobs. That's not just money. That's every Friday night you didn't go out. Every shift you picked up when your friends were at parties. Every "I can't, I'm working" text you sent. And Gerald sits this kid down and doesn't ask. He tells him to hand it over to fund Carlos's app, which, by the way, flopped. Never even launched. 8 months of playing entrepreneur and then just quit. That $12,000 would have bought absolutely nothing except the privilege of watching Carlos fail slightly more comfortably. For 6 years after that, I kept minimal contact, holidays only. And only because I was building something they didn't know about. See, here's what my family never understood about me. I'm patient, I'm quiet, and I'm smart. While Carlos bounced from failed venture to failed venture, always bailed out by our parents draining their retirement accounts, I graduated top of my class, got a job in finance, and started building actual wealth. I moved 3 hours away and let them think I was barely getting by. When they asked how I was doing, I said fine, nothing special. When they asked about work, I said it was okay. I never told them about the promotions, the bonuses, the investments that were paying off. I was waiting. And then 3 months ago, Carlos announced he was getting married to his girlfriend Abigail. The wedding was going to cost $50,000 because Carlos and Abigail wanted some destination thing in Mexico. And my parents had already promised to pay for it because of course they did. The problem was they didn't actually have $50,000. They'd spent most of their retirement savings bailing Carlos out of his various failures over the years. So my dad called me and said they needed my help. He wanted me to contribute $20,000 to my brother's wedding fund. I almost laughed out loud. $20,000 from the son they kicked out for refusing to give up $12,000. The audacity was almost impressive. I told my dad I'd think about it. He seemed surprised that I didn't immediately refuse. And honestly, that should have been his first clue that something had changed. The old Mitchell would have said no immediately and then felt guilty about it for months. This Mitchell had been waiting 6 years for them to need something from me. I told him I'd come to dinner that Sunday to discuss it. He was so pleased. He told my mom I was finally coming around, finally acting like part of the family. What they didn't know was that I had spent 6 years preparing for exactly this kind of moment. Not specifically for the wedding thing, but for any situation where they needed me, and I finally had leverage. I'd done my research. I knew things about their financial situation that they didn't even realize I knew. Over the years at family gatherings, I'd noticed bank statements left on counters, overheard arguments about money between my parents, seen Carlos's desperate texts asking for more bailouts on my mom's phone when she left it unlocked. I remembered everything. I cataloged it, because I knew someday it would matter. That Sunday, I drove to their house with something in my jacket pocket, an envelope. Inside that envelope was information that was going to change everything for this family, but I wasn't going to give it to them yet. First, I needed to sit through one more family dinner. I needed to hear exactly what they thought of me, what they really believed I owed them after everything they'd done. And let me tell you, what happened at that dinner was so much worse than I expected. I thought I knew how little they valued me. I was wrong. I had no idea just how far they were willing to go to squeeze every last drop out of me for Carlos's benefit. But that's for the next update. Because this is already long, and I need to explain exactly how that dinner went down before I tell you what was in that envelope. 6 years of showing up to holidays, smiling, eating the pot roast, watching them fawn over Carlos, while quietly leveling up in the background like a video game character they forgot to check on. They thought Mitchell was grinding at some dead-end job, barely making rent. Meanwhile, this man is in finance, stacking bonuses like, "Oh yeah, this is for the psychological damage from 2019. This one's for the car I had to sleep in. And this one is for every time Barbara called Carlos Gerald Jr. And the audacity to ask for $20,000 from the same kid you threw out over 12. Gerald really sat there doing the math and thought, well, inflation, so no. You don't get to kick someone out of the family and then send them an invoice for the reunion. That's not how any of this works. But Mitchell said, I'll think about it. And Gerald heard wedding bells instead of warning sirens. That man has no pattern recognition. Your quiet, observant son who you traumatized suddenly wants to discuss things at a family dinner? Brother, he's not bringing a check. He's bringing a reckoning. Update 1. All right, I'm back. Some of you asked for details about the dinner, and honestly, I've been putting off writing this because reliving it makes me angry all over again. But you deserve the full picture, so here it is. I showed up at my parents' house that Sunday around 5 in the evening. I drove my regular car, not the nicer one I keep for work events. I wore clothes that looked like I'd bought them at a discount store. Every detail mattered because for 6 years, I'd been playing the role of Mitchell who's doing okay but nothing special. And I needed them to keep believing that for just a little while longer. My mom opened the door and immediately commented on how thin I looked, asking if I was eating enough, saying I should come home more often so she could feed me properly. This is the same woman who watched my dad throw me out and didn't say a single word to stop it. But sure, Barbara, you're very concerned about my nutrition. The house looked the same as always. Photos of Carlos everywhere. His baseball trophies still displayed in the living room even though he's 30 years old. A few photos of Ariana from her college graduation. One photo of me from when I was maybe 8 years old, stuck in a corner behind a lamp. I used to think they just forgot to update it. Now I know they simply didn't care enough to bother. Carlos and Abigail were already there, sitting on the couch like royalty waiting to receive tribute. Abigail smiled at me and said it was nice to see me again. I said likewise. She really does seem nice, and I genuinely feel bad that she has no idea what kind of family she's marrying into. But that's not my problem to solve. Ariana showed up about 20 minutes later, barely acknowledging me before going straight to compliment Abigail's engagement ring. It's a 2-carat diamond, by the way. Carlos told everyone at Christmas that he'd saved up for it himself, but I happen to know my parents gave him the money because I overheard my mom complaining to my aunt about it during a family barbecue last summer. She didn't know I was in the next room. People forget I exist a lot, which has been useful for gathering information over the years. Dinner was pot roast. My dad sat at the head of the table and started talking about the wedding almost immediately. He went on and on about how beautiful Mexico was going to be, how proud he was of Carlos for finding such a wonderful woman, how this wedding was going to be the event of the year for our family. Then he looked at me and said he was glad I'd finally decided to step up and help make this happen. I hadn't agreed to anything yet. I'd said I would think about it, but Gerald had already rewritten history in his head to where I'd committed to giving them money. I asked exactly how much they needed from me. My dad said 20,000 would cover my share. My share. Like I was somehow obligated to fund my brother's destination wedding. I asked what everyone else was contributing, and the table went quiet. Turns out, Carlos and Abigail weren't contributing anything because they were the bride and groom. Ariana wasn't contributing because she was still paying off student loans, though she'd somehow managed to buy a new car 6 months ago, and my parents had already committed 40,000 of their own money, which meant they needed another 10 to reach 50, plus the 20 from me to have some buffer for unexpected expenses. So they wanted me to contribute more than Carlos himself, more than Ariana, more than my own share would be if we split things evenly, and they presented this like it was completely reasonable. I asked why I should pay more than everyone else. My mom started crying and said she couldn't believe I was being so calculating about my own brother's wedding. She said family doesn't keep score. Family just helps each other. I reminded her that family also doesn't kick their son out for refusing to be an ATM, and suddenly everyone was talking over each other. Gerald said I needed to let that go, that it was 6 years ago and I was still holding a grudge like a child. Carlos said I always made everything about myself, that I couldn't just be happy for him for once in my life. Ariana rolled her eyes and muttered that this was exactly why nobody wanted me around, because I always had to make things difficult. And here's where it got really interesting, because instead of getting angry, I got quiet. I asked them to explain to me, genuinely, why they thought I should give them $20,000. Not emotionally, not with guilt trips, but logically. What had they ever done for me that would justify me giving them that kind of money? My dad started listing things. They raised me. They fed me. They put a roof over my head for 18 years. They let me live at home during college until I chose to leave, as he put it. He actually said I chose to leave. Like being told to get out wasn't the same as being kicked out because I technically could have just handed over my savings and stayed. I pointed out that everything he listed was the legal minimum requirement for having a child. I didn't ask to be born. They chose to have me. Feeding and housing me wasn't a favor. It was their obligation. And they kicked me out. I didn't choose to leave. Carlos jumped in and said I was being ungrateful. He said I always acted like I was better than everyone else just because I got good grades, like that made me special. He said the family had done plenty for me, and I just didn't want to see it because I enjoyed being the victim. This is the part where I realized something I'd suspected for years, but never had confirmed. Carlos genuinely believes he deserves more than me. It's not an act. It's not manipulation. He truly thinks that because our parents favored him, that favoritism was justified. In his mind, he got more because he was more. Better son, better person, more worthy of love and resources. I asked Carlos directly what the family had done for me that was comparable to what they'd done for him. He said that wasn't the point. That family isn't about keeping score. I said he was right. It isn't. Which is why it was interesting that he couldn't name a single thing. My mom started crying harder and said I was ruining dinner, that I was ruining everything like I always did. She said she didn't understand why I couldn't just be normal, why I always had to make things so complicated. She said she'd prayed for years that I would change, but I never did. Prayed that I would change, not prayed that the family would treat me better. Prayed that I would become someone who accepted being treated like garbage without complaint. My dad stood up and said this was exactly what he expected from me. He said I had until the end of the month to give them the money, or I shouldn't bother coming to the wedding at all. He said if I couldn't support my own family, then I wasn't really part of it anymore. And this is the part that really got me, he said that maybe if I'd been more like Carlos growing up, things would have been different. Maybe if I'd tried harder to fit in, to be part of the family instead of always off in my own world, they would have had reason to treat me differently. So there it was, spoken out loud. They treated me like garbage because I wasn't Carlos. Because I looked different, acted different, didn't worship at the same altar they did. It was my fault for not being born as a copy of their favorite son. Ariana texted me as I was driving home. She called me a loser and said I'd embarrassed the whole family by making dinner about myself instead of being happy for Carlos. She said I was pathetic for still being hung up on things that happened years ago, and I needed to grow up. I didn't respond to her text. I just smiled, because they had no idea what was coming. The envelope was still in my jacket pocket. I hadn't given it to them yet because I wanted them to push me first. I needed them to show me exactly who they were one more time before I showed them exactly who I'd become. And guys, what's in that envelope is going to require some explanation, because it's not just one thing. It's the result of 6 years of paying attention, 6 years of planning, and 6 years of waiting for exactly this moment. But first, I need to tell you what I did the week after that dinner, because that's when things really started to escalate. Family doesn't keep score is wild, coming from people who kept score so precisely that one son got a car and college paid for, while the other one got a photo behind a lamp that hasn't been updated since he was 8. You kept score. You kept meticulous score. You just don't like it when the person you scored lowest starts reading the numbers back to you. And I need to talk about the psychological gymnastics happening at this dinner table. Gerald actually fixed his mouth to say Mitchell chose to leave. Brother, you gave him an ultimatum. Give up your life savings or get out. That's not a choice, that's extortion with a side of homelessness. That's like pushing someone off a cliff and saying they chose to fall, and then having the absolute nerve to say, maybe if you'd been more like Carlos. Gerald really said the abuse was your fault for not being your brother. He's essentially mad that Mitchell was born as himself instead of as a Carlos backup copy. 27 years of being someone's child, and they're still out here wishing you were somebody else. And Barbara praying for Mitchell to change, not praying for wisdom for herself, not praying for family unity, not praying to be a better mother, praying for her victim to become a more compliant victim. That's not motherhood. That's spiritual manipulation. She weaponized her faith to wish her own son into submission. Update 2. The week after that dinner, my family went through every manipulation tactic in the book. My mom called daily, cycling through guilt, nostalgia, and eventually anger. She talked about how I used to hold Carlos's finger as a baby, how we were so close before I pushed everyone away. Notice how in her version, I'm the one who created distance. Not them, not the favoritism, not kicking me out. My dad called Wednesday talking about legacy, about how the family home had been in his family for 2 generations. Carlos even sent a long text, clearly written with Abigail's help, about wanting the wedding to be a fresh start for the family. I screenshot it because I knew he'd revert to his real self soon enough. By Saturday, the nice act was over. Turns out Abigail's parents, the Lawsons, had been asking questions about the wedding budget. They're covering the rehearsal dinner while my parents handle the ceremony and reception. Abigail's parents wanted to see a cost breakdown, and my parents couldn't produce numbers that made sense because they were counting on my $20,000 that didn't exist. My mom called furious. She said I was embarrassing the family in front of wealthy people, that if the wedding fell apart, it would be my fault. I asked why she promised $50,000 she couldn't afford. She hung up. Now here's what they don't know I know. 2 years ago at Thanksgiving, I overheard my dad complaining to my uncle in the hallway. My parents had taken out a home equity line of credit to cover Carlos's credit card debts. The house that's been in Dad's family for 2 generations is now significantly mortgaged, and they've been drawing from that HELOC periodically to fund Carlos's lifestyle. I've been tracking public property records ever since, watching the debt grow. Sunday, my dad drove 3 hours and showed up at my apartment unannounced. He looked around at my furniture, my TV, my kitchen, doing math in his head. My place is clearly more than someone barely getting by would have. He told me he was done playing games. He said he knew I had more money than I'd let on, that I'd been lying about my situation for years. He gave me one final chance. Give them the money and be welcome back, or refuse and lose them forever. I asked what exactly I'd be losing since I'd been functionally without a family for 6 years already. He called me ungrateful, said everything I had was because of the foundation they gave me. I reminded him that they didn't pay for my education, that I had scholarships and worked 2 jobs. He said that wasn't true, that they let me live at home rent-free. I said they kicked me out before senior year. He said I was rewriting history. I said I was stating facts. Then Gerald said something that changed everything. He said if I didn't give them the money, he would tell our entire extended family that I had stolen from my parents years ago and refused to pay it back. He would destroy my reputation with every aunt, uncle, and cousin. Make me the villain when I was actually the victim. That's when I told him about the envelope. I didn't give it to him, but I said I had information that would make things very difficult for him, Barbara, and Carlos if it came out. I told him to think carefully before threatening me, because I wasn't the same scared 21-year-old he kicked out. He demanded to know what I meant. I told him to go home and wait. I'd make my decision by the end of the week. He called me a snake and said I was dead to him no matter what. That was Sunday. It's now Wednesday, and I've made my decision. Tomorrow, I'm driving to my parents' house. I'm leaving that envelope at their front door. Then, I'm going to wait for my phone to ring. What's in that envelope is going to destroy the comfortable lies they've built their lives around. They're going to understand exactly how badly they miscalculated when they decided I was worthless. I'll update after it happens. Gerald really drove 3 hours to show up unannounced at Mitchell's apartment, looked around at the nice furniture, did some mental real estate math, and instead of thinking, wow, my son is doing well, I'm proud of him, he thought, this lying little, he's been hiding money from us. Sir, he's not hiding money from you. He's just not giving it to you. Those are different things. His success is not your theft. His savings account is not your emergency fund. And then, Gerald threatens to tell the whole extended family that Mitchell stole from them. This man really stood in his son's apartment and said, give me $20,000 or I'll commit defamation. He tried to blackmail the finance guy, the guy who works in an industry where documentation and paper trails are everything. Gerald brought a butter knife to a missile silo. He threatened a man who has been quietly collecting receipts for 6 years. Mitchell probably has this conversation recorded. He probably has the text messages screenshotted. He probably has a spreadsheet titled Gerald's Lies with pivot tables and conditional formatting. You're dead to me no matter what. Brother, you already treated him like he was dead. That's not a threat, that's just a status update. Final update. I did it. I drove to my parents' house Thursday morning, left the envelope at their front door and drove away. Then, I parked down the street and waited. Let me tell you what was in that envelope, because this is what I'd been preparing for 6 years. First, there was a letter addressed to my parents. In it, I laid out everything, every instance of favoritism I remembered, the exact date they kicked me out, the amount I had saved that they demanded I give Carlos, the fact that I slept in my car for 2 weeks while finishing college, every holiday where I sat in that house and listened to them praise Carlos while ignoring me, every dollar they pulled from their HELOC to fund his failures. All of it, documented with dates and details. Second, there was a printout of the public property records showing their home equity debt. The house Gerald was so proud of, the one that had been in his family for 2 generations, was now leveraged to the point where they owed almost as much as it was worth, all because they couldn't stop funding Carlos. Third, and this is the part that mattered most, there was a copy of a letter I had already sent to the Lawsons, Abigail's wealthy parents who were so concerned about the wedding budget. That letter explained everything. It explained that my parents had promised to pay for a wedding they couldn't afford. It explained that they were planning to pressure their estranged son for $20,000 to cover the gap. It explained that the family home was mortgaged to fund my brother's repeated failures. It explained that my father had threatened to lie to the entire extended family about me if I didn't comply. I sent that letter to the Lawsons 3 days before I left the envelope at my parents' door. By the time my parents opened my envelope and realized what I'd done, the Lawsons had already read every word. I watched from down the street as my mom found the envelope on the doorstep. She brought it inside. About 10 minutes later, my phone started ringing. First, it was my mom, crying so hard I could barely understand her. She kept asking how I could do this, how I could betray my own family, how I could be so cruel. I told her I learned from the best. She hung up. Then my dad called. He was yelling, demanding to know what I had sent the Lawsons, saying I had destroyed everything, asking if I understood what I had done. I told him I understood perfectly. I told him this was what happened when you threatened to lie about your own son. He said he would never forgive me. I said that was fine because I had never forgiven him either. Carlos called next. And this is the part I want you all to really hear, because this is when I knew every single moment of the past 6 years had been worth it. Carlos was panicking. Abigail's parents had called her after receiving my letter. They had questions. A lot of questions. They wanted to know why Carlos's family was in so much debt. They wanted to know why his parents had been lying about the wedding budget. They wanted to know about the brother who had been kicked out and was now being threatened. Abigail was at her parents' house and wouldn't answer Carlos's calls. Carlos begged me to fix it. He said I was ruining his life, ruining his future, ruining the only good thing that had ever happened to him. I asked him if he remembered what he said at dinner about me always making everything about myself. He said this was different. I said no, it wasn't. He offered to pay me back for the $12,000 from 6 years ago. I said it was never about the money. He offered to apologize publicly to everyone in the family. I said it was too late. He asked what I wanted, what would make me undo this. I told him there was nothing he could give me that would undo 6 years of waiting for this exact moment. I told him I wanted him to understand what it felt like to have everything taken away because someone else decided you weren't worth keeping. Then I hung up. Ariana called about an hour later. She was furious. She said I was a monster, that I had destroyed our parents, that the Lawsons were threatening to pull out of the wedding entirely if they couldn't get honest answers about the family finances. She said Abigail was reconsidering the engagement. She said our mom hadn't stopped crying all day. I asked Ariana if she remembered calling me a loser after that dinner. She said I was being petty. I said I was being honest. She said the family would never recover from this. I said that wasn't my problem anymore. That evening, my dad called one final time. His voice was completely different. No anger, no demands. Just desperation. He begged me to call the Lawsons and tell them I had lied, that I had made everything up because I was jealous of Carlos. He said he would do anything, give me anything, if I would just take it back. I asked him if he remembered saying I should have been more like Carlos. He said he didn't mean it. I asked if he remembered threatening to tell the extended family I had stolen from them. He said he was angry and it was a mistake. I asked if he remembered kicking me out 3 weeks before my senior year started. He said he thought I would come back. He said he never expected me to actually leave. He said they figured I would give in after a few days like I always did, and when I didn't, they didn't know how to admit they were wrong, so they just let it go on. They let it go on. For 6 years. They let me sleep in my car and struggle through my last year of college and build a life without them, and they just let it go on. Because admitting they were wrong was too hard. I told my dad that the letter to the Lawsons was just the beginning. I told him I had written a similar letter to every aunt, uncle, and cousin in our extended family, and I had scheduled those to send at the end of the week, unless he wanted to admit the truth himself. I told him he had until Sunday to call every relative and explain exactly what he did to me 6 years ago, or I would do it for him. He asked why I was doing this. I told him that 6 years ago he said I wasn't family because I wouldn't give Carlos my savings. Now I was giving him a chance to prove whether family actually meant anything to him, or if it was just a word he used when he wanted something. So that's where we are now. The wedding is in chaos. Carlos and Abigail aren't speaking. My parents are facing financial questions from the Lawsons they can't answer without exposing how badly they've mismanaged everything. And my dad has until Sunday to tell our entire extended family the truth about what he did, or I will. They kicked me out for refusing to give up $12,000. They demanded $20,000 more and threatened to destroy my reputation when I refused. And now, their golden child's perfect wedding is collapsing because they never imagined the son they discarded would be in a position to fight back. I sat there smiling through that whole dinner because I knew exactly what was coming. And now my dad is begging me on the phone to undo what I did. I'm not going to.